Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for an MP webinar covering harassment prevention, best practices, and proven tactics for 2023. I'm Katie Kreider, Marketing Specialist here at MP. For those of you joining us on the webinar for the first time, MP is a full-service human capital management company. We offer a complete suite of products and services to support organizations through the entire employee lifecycle, including recruiting, HR, payroll, benefits administration, time and attendance, and compliance assistance. We support our clients with cutting-edge technical solutions, as well as proactive, reliable service and a deep HR and payroll expertise. At MP, we are wired for HR and help our clients succeed by aligning their people strategy with their business goals. I'm excited to introduce your presenter for today's program, Paul Carelis. Paul has over a decade of experience in the HR consulting space, working with businesses of all sizes and industries. Paul leads a team of SHRM-certified HR professionals, and together they assist clients with compliance, training, and HR guidance and support for the full employee lifecycle. Paul also spearheads MP's employee retention tax credit services, and this initiative has helped thousands of clients claim over $100 million in refundable, advanceable tax credits. So just a quick few housekeeping issues before we get started here today. If you would like to submit a question during the program, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. We will be sending out the recording of the webinar later today, along with the slides. So with all of that, I'm going to hand the mic off to Paul.
Thank you so much, Katie. Happy April, everybody. Good to talk to you again, and certainly a timely topic. As we work with clients and businesses of all shapes and sizes, we continue to see an uptick of harassment claims and investigations and harassment cases here in the U.S. And also timely as April is National Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So while that's the most extreme case of sexual harassment, it oftentimes does tie in. So something important to talk about and important to make sure that you're prepared for and know how to best handle within your workplace. So in terms of what we'll be discussing this afternoon, first we'll go over some data from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So kind of what harassment looks like at the national level. We'll then dive into kind of the more formal and legal definitions of harassment. I think that's really important. It might seem fairly basic, but in my 15 plus years of working in an HR capacity, so often both employees as well as employers oftentimes will use the term harassment without really understanding from a legal perspective what is harassment and what may not be harassment. Doesn't mean it's acceptable, could still be something regarding disciplinary action or a violation of company policy, but it is very important to be able to differentiate between harassment and other potential infractions. We'll then touch on liability at the company level as well as the individual contributor level. We'll focus on what to include in a proper training program, what points to really hit home, how to properly design or what to include in an ideal harassment policy, steps that your managers and your supervisors can take to avoid harassment claims, and then your responsibilities as businesses, the responsibilities of your managers and supervisors, as well as closing with some tips personally from me. All right, so the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC for short, recently released a report. And so this report was focused on fiscal years 2018, from when they kind of marked the beginning of the Me Too movement and when workplace harassment claims really started to spike, through fiscal year 2021, so a 3-year period. So all of the data we're talking about here is a composite of fiscal year 2018 through 2021. During that time, during that 3-year period, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission received 98,411 total harassment charges. So those are ones that went right to the federal government or ended up there. This does not count, obviously, things that were handled in-house by a business, nor does it count things that were handled at the state level. So I sit in Massachusetts. The Mass Commission Against Discrimination, or MCAD, handles things at the state level. Other states have other equivalent agencies of different names, but this nearly 100,000 case number is strictly the ones that rose to the national government level. Of that 98,000 plus, 27,000 were specifically sexual harassment. So the others were other discriminatory harassment based on other protected classes. We'll talk about that in a bit. Of the sexual harassment charges, 78% of those were brought on by women. And of the 98,000 total harassment charges, only 62% of those were filed by women. So 48 of the overall harassment charges were brought on by men. And of the sexual harassment charges, nearly half of those also claimed some sort of retaliation by the employer or by the company in addition to the sexual harassment. So that's a really important thing. A huge majority of overall EEOC cases, whether they be harassment or other forms of discrimination, a ton of those will tend to be spurred on by some sort of retaliation by the company. So something we'll talk about at length. Of all the monies paid out in damages and charges by the EEOC in that 3-year period, 18% of that money was tied to a harassment charge. And the sexual harassment charges and the money recovered by the EEOC due to sexual harassment violations by companies totaled $300 million over those 3 years across 8,147 employees or recipients. So just a huge number. And again, this does not count things that were handled at the state level either. So that number is most likely much, much higher. But just at the EEOC federal level, $300 million paid out by employers to folks in that 3-year period over sexual harassment charges. And then based on their study, despite these kind of staggering numbers, EOC estimates that 90% of people who are harassed in some way, that goes completely unreported at any level. So again, as big of a number as it is, it's just scratching the surface in terms of what they and what we suspect is actually going on at workplaces across the country. All right, so now that we have the numbers behind us and kind of see what's been going on for the last several years at the federal government, let's talk about harassment, because again, so many times a business will call and say that an employee is claiming harassment or they feel there's harassment going on in the workplace. And it's something you really kind of have to take a closer look at. Again, it could be a violation of your standards of conduct. It could be bad behavior. It could still be something we want to discipline or fire someone about. But for legal purposes and for EEOC purposes or state discrimination commission purposes, it's really important we're able to separate harassment from other concerns. So the formal definition of harassment in terms of this application is a form of discrimination violating federal and state anti-discrimination laws. For something to be considered discriminatory harassment, it needs to be unwelcome by the other party. So if it's something, if it's inappropriate banter that the other party enjoys or doesn't mind, and it's welcome, not legally harassment, at least against that person. And it must be based on a protected status. So at the federal level, these are the federally protected classes: race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy. When we talk about sexual harassment, that's considered a form of sex discrimination. National origin, age, but only age when it's pertaining to an incident where someone is or is perceived to be 40 years of age or older. Age is not a protected class for individuals under the age of 40. Disability and genetic information. Now, this is at the federal level. Most, if not all, states have their own set of protected classes, and many times will have additional protected classes. So looking around at other states, one of the newest ones that's popping up a lot is gender identity. So dealing with gender identity issues, that's quickly become a protected class in many states. Also, as part of the Crown Act, hairstyles and hair textures have also become a protected class in many states. You can also will sometimes see military membership and things like that. So each state has its own set of protected classes. You do want to make sure you familiarize yourself with what the protected classes are in the state or the states that you do business in, because that will ultimately be what pertains. But once you do know what the protected classes are, if you just have, let's say, a manager or supervisor who yells at people, is a real jerk, for lack of a better term, that's not necessarily harassment, not necessarily illegal. If they're just indiscriminately yelling at people in a bad mood, not bringing in race, color, sex, gender, any of those things, just calling everyone bleeping lazy or bad workers, those people are probably feeling harassed. It could potentially be a bullying situation, and you may or may not have an anti-bullying policy in your handbook or at your company. Again, it could just be a behavior that doesn't fit your company culture or your standards of conduct. So again, not to say that this boss or supervisor isn't doing anything wrong, but when we talk about, are they actually committing harassment? If their tirades are not related to a protected class, then no, they're not. So, in addition to what we said, when it's aside from, once you've determined, yes, it's unwelcome, yes, it's based on a protected class. In addition to that, the conduct must also be subjectively abusive to the person affected and severe and pervasive enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person would find hostile or abusive. So there isn't really a mathematical definition of reasonable person, but it is a legal term meaning someone of average competency and intelligence and background, and whether or not this hypothetical person would find the actions hostile or abusive. So when I talk with clients, when I talk with businesses, I generally say, best case scenario, we really don't want a judge or a jury determining that reasonable person standard. We should play things a little bit more conservatively in our practice and process for dealing with claims and in the workplace that we create and that we foster. But in terms of the legal definition, this is it. So I will say, in cases that I've studied, when it comes to harassment claims, in most courts, the bar is set pretty high for something to be considered severe and pervasive. I've seen some cases of pretty awful things happen in a workplace, and for whatever reason, a court has decided that it wasn't severe or pervasive, did not rise to the level of harassment. But again, I never advise my clients to be the test case for that, or to test out that theory and see if these courts are going to act the same as those previous. So always a good idea to play it safe and play it conservatively when it comes to determining whether behavior is acceptable in the workplace. But again, just want to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to definitions of harassment and that legal standard. So, and again, just to be clear, when we're talking about potential harassment claims that are being brought forth by an employee or by a non-employee, the person that we need to deal with as the potential harasser can be that victim supervisor, boss, manager, can be someone from leadership in another department or another area. There can be peer-to-peer harassment, or it can be someone who isn't an employee of the business at all. Could be a vendor, could be a delivery person, could be a client or a customer that is harassing one of your employees. So think about a restaurant or a bar and a really inappropriate or rude customer or client. As the employer, you're still expected to have a harassment-free workplace. So it is your responsibility to handle those issues, even when the harasser is not an employee of yours. Now, when we talk about sexual harassment, as I said before, it falls under discrimination laws based on gender or sex. And obviously, the victim and the harasser can be opposite sex, same sex. Definitely seen a large spike. It wasn't in that EEOC report recently, but there was a previous EEOC report that did outline how fast same-sex harassment claims are rising and how quickly harassment claims being put forth by men are also rising. So these discrimination laws do not discriminate. One thing that we always try to hit home, and I recommend if you go out and train your employees, or most importantly, train your managers and supervisors on the concepts of harassment and really work hard to create a workplace that's free of harassment. This statement here is very, very important. Oftentimes when we're doing an investigation or we're dealing with a situation and kind of unpacking it, a lot of times these claims and these charges and the circumstances aren't something malicious. It's someone talking inappropriately. It's someone saying something that makes someone else uncomfortable. But oftentimes it's a misunderstanding. It might be a misreading of someone's feelings for someone else. In today's workplace, we have 4 or 5 generations all working together in the same place. So there are generational differences, there are cultural differences, all kinds of things. And so often the person who is the accused in a harassment investigation really wasn't trying to make another person uncomfortable, really wasn't acting out of evil or, again, malice or anything like that. But those kind of things are not factored in when it's being legally determined whether or not harassment occurred. And that's really important to understand. So it really doesn't, the intent of the harasser really isn't important. It's all about the impact and how it's perceived by the other person. I will say, when we talk with businesses, I think intent does matter when we're determining what the appropriate form of disciplinary action is. I think re-education can go a long way. Training can go a long way. I'm not a big fan of firing someone over what we feel is an honest mistake. Obviously, you need to handle each case individually. You want to be as consistent as possible, but I tend to save the immediate terminations for the really severe and malicious cases. So I think intent does matter when it comes to the correct punishment, but when it comes to determining harassment, it is all about the impact. So when we talk about sexual harassment specifically, there's basically 2 kinds: hostile work environment and quid pro quo. So quid pro quo is one you have to be on the lookout for among your management and leadership teams. So those are the ones that you see kind of in those cheesy sexual harassment videos. Something that results in a tangible employment decision based on an employee's acceptance or rejection of sexual advances of some sort. So that might be a supervisor denying a promotion, or someone refusing to be sexually cooperative, or someone or a manager or supervisor giving preferential treatment to someone who does cooperate sexually. Hostile work environment sexual harassment is pretty much anything else that's creating that uncomfortable, hostile work environment based on that reasonable person standard we talked about. Just something that's inappropriate and interfering with a cohesive workplace. It can be verbal, inappropriate things said, grilling someone about their sexual history, making lewd comments to someone else about their appearance, things like that. It can be nonverbal, it can be hand gestures, it can be inappropriate emails, and then it can be physical too. And those are the ones we tend to take especially seriously, or maybe have an immediate dismissal for. Inappropriate touching, grabbing, God forbid, sexual assault or something like that. An exercise we do as part of our more formal training with employees and with managers and supervisors is an activity we call How Would You Feel? So I think that's really good for setting a basis of perception. Everybody has their own set of values. Everyone has their own background. Everybody, has their own belief system. So we go through an activity that just goes through various scenarios, does not have any right or wrong answers by any means, but says things like, Joe, your coworker, knows you were having a hard day, so gave you a quick shoulder rub or gave you a hug. Or you walk into a meeting late and someone says, it's great to have you and your smile here, things like that. So is that necessarily harassment? No. Is it necessarily not harassment? No. One thing we really need to do as employees and as employers is really keep in mind how things may be perceived, not knowing what someone else's background or value system is. And oftentimes another big factor is who is it on the other end. I might be okay with one person hugging me, and I might not be okay with another person hugging me. So again, it's really about the impact and how it's perceived. And it's always good to give your employees and your managers and supervisors that frame of mind that everybody's different. We don't want to do anything to blow up company culture here or the relationships that you've developed, but just be mindful of your behavior and how it might be perceived as others, especially for newer employees or employees that you don't know so well and you don't know, where the line is with them. So some other examples of sexual harassment that we see in the workplace: inappropriate jokes, written or verbal references, suggestive pictures, comments about someone's body or appearance, leering, whistling, brushing up against someone unnecessarily, inappropriate gestures, or inquiries or discussions of sexual activities. So that's sexual harassment. When it comes to other harassment, it really kind of falls under that same hostile work environment standard, but it is instead based on one of those other protected classes that we spoke about earlier. So again, the kind of checklist that you should be going through when determining if you have a hostile work environment situation: is the conduct unwelcome? If it's two employees being overly flirtatious with each other, again, it's something you probably want to put a stop to. It might not be appropriate for your workplace, but it isn't harassment because it's at least conceivably welcome by both parties. How severe or pervasive is it? Again, just because something happens one time, that might be enough if it's severe. If it happens one time and someone complains about it, you do want to speak to the other party and make sure it stops. But again, it might not legally rise to the bar of harassment if it isn't truly a pervasive and repeated thing. Does the conduct affect the workplace? And then lastly, is it related to a protected category or class? So to kind of give a visual to that, for discriminatory harassment, we're saying, is it unwelcome or welcome? Is it severe or pervasive or not severe or pervasive? And then is it related to a protected group or not? So you'd want all three of those boxes checked in order for you to determine, yes, we do have a harassment situation here. Now, on the other hand, the bar is a lot lower, again, depending on your policies and your culture and your environment. Is something a violation of company policy and standards of conduct? You really ask yourself, is it inappropriate or is it appropriate? Once that's determined, it doesn't really matter whether or not the behavior was related to a protected group or a protected class, because if it's not something appropriate that you've determined for your workplace, then it's a company policy violation and should be handled as such. All right, next, workplace relationships. There isn't anything legally speaking that prevents two employees from being romantic with one another or dating or marrying or being married. That said, you can certainly have your own company policies that restrict or forbid it. At the very least, I highly recommend having a policy that does not allow people within the same reporting structure to have a romantic relationship. So you don't want your managers and supervisors dating people that report to them. You can expand upon that as much as you feel is appropriate. At the very least, if you do allow dating and you know that two employees are romantically tied, I do recommend sitting them down, acknowledging the relationship, and just putting it out there that you're expecting them to remain professional, stick to their job duties, not allow their relationship to affect their performance, and also throw it out there that it's going to be perceived by others that you'll be playing favorites, and that it's your responsibility to go above and beyond to prove that that isn't happening, and that as much as we believe in fairy tale romance and true love, many workplace relationships do end up dissolving, and that if that does happen, it is especially important that you remain professional. Otherwise, there could be some consequences. So some of the most disturbing harassment and sexual harassment cases that we've had to deal with in working with other businesses have surrounded a workplace relationship that's gone sour and led to legal action, police involvement, restraining orders, and worse. So definitely something to be mindful of, and certainly consider having a policy in your handbook that outlines your expectations and what you allow and don't allow in terms of workplace romantic relationships. So again, in terms of who's covered by your harassment policies, all employees are protected from anyone who enters the workplace, in turn, your vendors and your customers are protected as well. So as a business, you're responsible for having a workplace free of harassment for all. Where is covered is very, very important. And that's something that's really changed over the last dozen or so years. So a lot of times we think small and think, hey, if something here happens at the office, yes, that's something we need to deal with. If something happens outside of work, that's something that needs to be handled by those individuals, or they can talk to the police if it's a serious problem, but it's not our problem. And that's very short-sighted. So aside from any physical workplaces you have, the workplace when it comes to harassment laws includes customer and client locations. So if you're doing on-site meetings or catering at weddings or other parties, all those places are potential scenes of harassment or settings for harassment. Any work-related events, a lot of times businesses will have us come in and do a training before a holiday party or something like that, just to be a good reminder of what's expected of them behavior-wise. After hours activities, even if it isn't company sponsored. So a few employees decide to go out for dinner or drinks after work. If things turn sour and are ultimately going to affect the workplace, the way I always tell people to think about it is, even if it happened outside of work, if those two people are, in the next few days working together at the same time in the same place, are those actions that transpired going to affect their ability to work comfortably? If the answer is yes, then it's something we need to investigate. And then the other thing is, we're not just talking about physical places. In this day and age, we need to talk about virtual settings as well. So huge astronomical uptick in harassment claims due to text messages, Facebook Messenger, Snapchat, TikTok, all of those things, certainly goes beyond email. Even if those things are completely outside of work, they're not work accounts, they're people's personal social media accounts. If inappropriate or harassing things are transpiring on those channels, again, even if it's not being done on working time at the workplace, again, if that's ultimately going to affect the workplace when those people are in together again, then it's something that we need to be worried about and need to be addressing. So as employers, how we address harassment with our employees is really going to be the most critical issue in determining liability if things do move to legal action and litigation. Depending on what state you're in, and this isn't something, it's something we mentioned to our managers and supervisors just so they're aware, not meant to be a scare tactic, but something important for them to understand. More and more states now do have the option of holding managers and supervisors individually liable for harassment claims when it's found that they were especially egregious or otherwise at fault for not preventing the harassment, or they were the harasser. They can be held individually liable in many states now, not just the company. But one thing that is important for you to realize as a business, these managers and supervisors are agents of your company. So the things that those managers do, or maybe more importantly, the things that your managers and supervisors don't do, are actions on behalf of your company. So it's things that your company is or is not doing. So that can certainly make the managers and supervisors a huge liability. But hopefully, if we get them the proper training and give them the proper direction and the proper tools to be advocates and folks within your organization that are helping you prevent harassment, and when it does occur, making sure it's properly investigated and weeded out, then they can be a real asset to your organization as well and keep you safe. So something that's really important for us to hit home to our managers is when they have a duty to report. So we really want to create an environment where if something's reported to a manager, or if they see something or hear something, that they're reporting it through the proper channels to leadership, to HR, whatever your structure is, whoever is going to be handling harassment claims. We really need to set them up and set the expectation that they need to be communicating things when they're told or when they see them. So some things to hammer home. We need to properly document and take seriously a complaint, even if the complainant is reluctant. So we'll talk about this again towards the end, but So often, and I'm sure you've experienced this too at some point, your managers and supervisors will develop relationships with some of the employees, friendships, or someone that confides in them, or they may have been friends previously. And a lot of times someone will just kind of be having a conversation and just say, oh yeah, Joe got a little drunk the other night when we were at dinner and he said this to me or did this, but I really don't want to make a big deal about it. I don't want to get him in trouble. Those things can so oftentimes turn sour. So our natural inclination is to say, okay, we want to respect this person. We don't want to make a big deal out of it. They don't wish to, so we'll just keep quiet about it. Problem is that let's fast forward a few months, and this employee that made that comment to you and didn't want to make a big deal out of things, all of a sudden their performance starts to slide. They start being late, or they start doing a lousy job, or whatever it is, and they end up getting disciplined, or maybe they get laid off or terminated. Their back is against the wall. They're looking for income. They're thinking back to that time where they said something. Maybe they think that them saying something, even though you didn't make a full-blown investigation out of it, that factored into your employment decision. Well, let's say they lawyer up and mention that, hey, yeah, I did say to my manager that Joe was inappropriate at dinner that night, and they didn't really do anything about it. If you find yourself on the stand in litigation and your defense as to why you didn't investigate the harassment claim was that the employee didn't want to make a big deal about it, you're going to lose that case nearly 100% of the time. So what we say to managers in terms of word tracks and how to respond to those situations is to say, look, you showed a lot of courage. It's really brave of you to mention this to me. There may be other individuals who are not feeling so brave and courageous that aren't saying anything about it. And really, as a manager and as a leader at the company, it's my responsibility to make sure that this kind of stuff isn't happening here. And so I understand you don't want to make a big deal about it, but we need to for the betterment of the company and for anyone else who may be being affected by this. So we do need to conduct an investigation. In addition to that, you do still need to move forward with the process, even if the complaint is verbal, and even if they say they're not willing to put it in writing. In those situations, what I recommend doing is having the employee tell the story, you writing it down and then reading it back to them to make sure that what you wrote down is accurate. But you cannot require an employee to put something in writing if they don't wish to. Definitely proceed, even if you feel that something is trivial or false. Let the investigation determine that. You don't want to create an environment that can be seen as chilling to harassment claims, or create an environment where where people feel that their complaints or the impact to them is not being taken seriously. And you also want to formally investigate and document even if something results in immediate action. So you witness a physical assault and someone's fired on the spot, something like that, you still want to document everything. So if a court case does come of it down the road, or there's a claim of retaliation, you can show that you properly went through the motions to document the harassment case, ideally. So in addition to when complaints are made, a person verbalizes concerns to another person. The legal standard for a business, and again, extending to managers and supervisors, is that they need to take action when harassment occurs or something that they know about it, or if they know or should have known about it. So what that means is, let's say there's a over-the-top inappropriate email that gets sent out. If managers and supervisors are CC'd on that email, then they knew about it or should have known about it. Or if it's something that happened in front of a large group, including managers and supervisors, or it's otherwise very obvious that there's no reasonable way that the company couldn't have known what was going on. Even if it isn't formally reported, the legal standard is still that the employer needs to address that. So how do you want to direct your managers and supervisors? You want to have them contact the appropriate individual at your company to conduct an investigation. hopefully, and we'll talk about this in our tips and tricks later, hopefully you have someone who knows how to properly conduct an investigation. If not, certainly reach out to someone who does, and they can either walk you through the process or help you complete the investigation. Act immediately as reasonable. Again, so many cases of this are misunderstandings or not malicious, and we do want to take advantage of the opportunity to re-educate or get a real valid description of what exactly happened. And if someone doesn't realize that they're doing something wrong, the more time that lapses, the more likely they are to forget what they exactly did. And you do want to quickly get with the employee who's the potential victim to get their initial information as soon as possible. Again, just to get an accurate account as possible. Once you've gotten their kind of testimony, so to speak, as part of the investigation, you do want to review your non-harassment policy if you have one with the employee, just to show the stance that your company has and what the process is. You want to discuss confidentiality. I don't recommend saying we guarantee that we're going to keep this 100% confidential. Obviously, as part of an investigation, there may be witnesses you need to speak to. There may be other things where you don't want to guarantee any certain level of confidentiality if you can't 100% ironclad guarantee it. What you will want to say is we're going to keep things as confidential as possible and keep things on a need-to-know basis. We ask that you do the same. Really, really important. Go over your zero tolerance policy, and I will say you should or need to have one. When it comes to retaliation, just say our company has no tolerance for retaliation. It is illegal. By coming forward with a good faith claim of harassment, regardless of what the findings are, whether we determine that harassment did or did not occur, because you came forward in good faith, that you weren't fictitious or making things up or framing someone for something they didn't do. As long as your complaint is in good faith, you are protected and will suffer no repercussions whatsoever as a result of you coming forward. And we will communicate this to our management teams as well. If you feel you are being treated poorly or differently because of coming forward, please let me know right away so that I can address it. Really important you set that standard and set that environment, that retaliation is not accepted. Again, so many cases get spurred on or become litigation because of some sort of retaliation at the company level. And then do tell the employee that they will be kept informed as you progress through the findings. And you do, once you've concluded things, depending on the situation and the environment, you may or may not want to go into specific detail in terms of findings or what the ultimate punishment is. It's really on a case-by-case basis, but do keep them informed and do let them know when things have wrapped up. So in terms of who's protected from retaliation, anyone who files a discrimination charge, again, provided it's in good faith, anyone who participates in an investigation, proceeding, or lawsuit. So it's important you go over that same kind of script when you're talking to witnesses. A lot of times witnesses may be reluctant to participate, but the more that you can thank them for their participation and their courage and assure them that they will not and cannot be retaliated against for participating and for their honest account, that will hopefully spur them to be honest and speak at length with you. And legally speaking, employees who oppose discriminatory employment practices also can't be retaliated against. So almost like a whistleblower type situation. So some things to do. A, make sure you have a strong policy which explicitly prohibits harassment. We'll talk about some key components of a good harassment policy in a second. Provide annual training to educate your employees and your managers. So some states require this. California, New York, Maine, Illinois, Connecticut. Some have certain employee count thresholds. So there are some states that require harassment training. Here in Massachusetts, we highly recommend it. We don't require it. We do require a harassment policy that's in writing and distributed at least once a year to any company with 6 or more employees. But if you are in a state that does require harassment training, there may be certain topics that need to be covered. Some states, such as California, have required length of the training, a different required length for employees versus managers and supervisors. So just make sure if you are doing training, if you're in a state that requires it, that you're checking all the boxes for the things that it needs to include. But even if you're not, it is a really good idea to provide training. And if you're on a really tight budget or tight for time, busy companies, so many companies that have their employees wearing multiple hats and don't have much time for training and development. If you can only train one group, please, please, please train your managers and supervisors. Again, they are agents of your company. They need to be equipped and informed with what to do. And we're not expecting them to be doing investigations or doing the paperwork or anything like that. They just need to know what to look out for. And when they hear it or when they see it, that they know who to talk to about it, and then let someone else do the heavy lifting. But please, I urge you to get your managers and supervisors trained. Something we offer here at MP through our HR services. If you're interested, there are also LMS options for on-demand electronic training. So again, make sure your managers and supervisors have the knowledge they need to properly respond. Next, again, ensure that every complaint is taken seriously. Really, really important. So many of these cases are just managers, supervisors, or employers kind of ignoring signs or ignoring claims, and then that person goes to the state or the EEOC and files a charge, and next thing you know, you find yourself in their offices or in a courtroom responding to those complaints. Investigate immediately, take appropriate corrective action. Again, the intent may factor into the appropriate corrective action, but make sure you're discussing with some HR professionals what the best course of action is. It can be everything from a verbal warning to a written warning to a suspension to a termination. Again, it could be re-education, it could be mandated training, whatever it is, but do try to get the whole start to finish wrapped up relatively quickly. And then, as we said, keep the victim informed and really, really hammer home that retaliation piece. So, keys to a solid harassment policy. First of all, again, you want to review and follow any state guidelines or requirements. If the state has certain language that they want in there, definitely include that, even if it doesn't kind of match the voice and culture of your company. If they say something has to be in there, just put it in there. Create clear instruction in the policy for how to report harassment. So who they should go to, but also say who they can go to. So I really recommend having something in there that gives them some instructions. They can reach out to this person or to this department, or here's a number, email for human resources. But then I also really am a big fan of putting something in there, or feel free to speak to any member of management that you feel comfortable talking to. Again, you want to create as many pathways to resolving this internally, rather than having them feel like they don't have a comfortable way to report in-house. So they're going to go to their state discrimination department, or they're going to go to the EEOC. You want to do all that you can to be able to handle these things in-house. So create an environment that gives employees multiple options for who they can talk to seek some help. Definitely encourage communication and open door approach, that you want to help, that you want to know about these things. Don't make it something where, hey, we're a good employer, but if you feel you're being harassed, then I guess, come to us about it. You got to jump through all these hoops, but this is how you have to do it. We're mandating you do it this very specific way. Try to be understanding. Again, try to be open with it. Do mention the retaliation provisions in the policy. Again, you can't mention that enough. Just believe me on that. You cannot mention it enough. And then it is a good idea, as much as we want to handle things in-house, that you do include the state and federal agencies that handle harassment, so that you've kind of done your goodwill attempt to show all the options that the employee has, both in-house and outside. So some things to hit on with your managers. Make sure that they're avoiding any harassing behavior of any kind. Have them monitoring your workplace. Make sure they're keeping their eyes and their ears open to potential harassment. Again, take all the complaints seriously. Make sure your managers are as well. Even if you know so, make sure that they are too, and that they're not being flippant about it. Make sure that they're responding promptly, that they're reporting things to you promptly, and do ask that they cooperate with any investigation. If someone came forward to them, we might want to get their take and what was said, to make sure that the testimony that was told to them matches what was told to you. Make sure that they're applying workplace rules consistently, that they're not playing favorites, that they're not being flirty with your staff. Make sure they're using respectful language at work and work-related functions. I think, again, we don't want to disrupt company culture. If you have a certain vernacular at your company that you're comfortable with and everyone seems to be comfortable with, I'll leave that to your discretion. I also think it's okay to hold management to a higher standard with that if you wish to do so. And certainly, again, make sure your managers are behaving and not spouting off negative jokes or comments that could get them in hot water and get you in hot water. Because again, they're speaking on behalf of the company. We also like to hit home what we call the 5 R's with managers. So these are the skills we're expecting them to, and behaviors we're expecting them to employ. First is recognize, be able to spot issues that are of potential concern. Make sure they're removing themselves from participating in anything that could be considered harassment. Redirect. So sometimes, you see a conversation, you see some kind of water cooler talk or locker room talk that is going down a bad path. So one thing you'll notice, we didn't see a political party or politics as a protected class. It isn't federally, it isn't at state level either. So again, is political talk or banter about politics harassment? No. Is it something that based on the related subject matter, once you start talking about religion or abortion or race or racism, can it quickly devolve into something that affects a protected class? Yes, certainly. So if you see things getting heated, if you see, let's say, political or even sports related banter start to go down a dangerous path, get your managers to learn how to redirect those conversations and stay on the up and up. Re-educate. So again, this isn't meant to be this overly environment full of punishment and firing anyone who throws out a outdated term that's racially insensitive or offensive to people with disabilities. That's not what we're going for this. And ultimately, it's your business. You can decide what your standards are and how strict you want to be with this thing. But don't be afraid to have an environment that's focused on re-education. You don't need to necessarily terminate or cancel people out for an honest mistake. You certainly can in most circumstances. But again, so many people that I've encountered when we've had to deal with these investigations and deal with people who said something are mortified, embarrassed, and oftentimes just unaware of what they say and how it impacts other people. So there can be really a happy ending with these things. So often people say, oh, geez, I didn't realize. And, now I see, and I'd like to apologize to the person. And we have had a lot of happy endings to some really disturbing cases. And then again, teach the team on how to properly respond. Let them know, again, this isn't the, you don't have to bear all the weight with this. You just need to know who to talk to and let us know when something happens so that we can properly take it from there. All right, so here are my top tips. I got a couple pages here as we close out. So these are really the things you want to hit home in closing. These should be your key takeaways from today. Insist with your management team that all potential harassment claims are reported. Do not let them brush anything under the rug. Again, even if we know it's silly, we still want to document it. We want to talk to the person, let them know, hey, here's what harassment is. We feel that this was a misunderstanding, or, we'll talk to the person, but this was not legally speaking harassment. Remind everyone that harassment is not limited to the confines of the workplace, that their behavior after hours, even if they go out for drinks with someone or even via text message or Facebook or Instagram, can still be a harassment case. Educate your folks on what is and what isn't harassment. Make it clear that behavior and conduct is still important. So yeah, we want to define what harassment is and what it isn't, but again, just because something isn't a protected class doesn't mean we want you being a jerk at work. Make sure that anyone that's going to be responsible for investigations is properly trained, or that your employing or getting involved with people who can conduct a proper investigation. You don't want that to be the place that you slip up. Do familiarize yourself and your team with the protected classes in your state or your states. Again, each state has its own list. You may be surprised by what some of the protected classes are where you do business. If you haven't already, make sure you create that policy, that you distribute it. Distribution of the policy is a great time to also do a training. And again, make sure that the language within that policy is not intimidating, and that it creates an environment that people feel comfortable reporting in. Again, I know I've said it a million times, but please make sure that everyone is aware about retaliation rules. Those are just come back to bit way too many employers. And once you do have a case and have an investigation and case is closed, hopefully you've had a good ending and everybody's happy with the outcome, except maybe the harasser, depending on what the situation was. Do follow up with the person who came forward. Check in, make sure they're not being retaliated against, make sure they're comfortable. Really, I would say do it a week afterwards, do it 30 days after, do it 60 days after, do it 90 days after. Following up is, again, going to create a good perception as a business, as an employer for that person. Let them know that you care, that you didn't forget about it, you weren't just going through the motions, and really, A, help make sure that retaliation isn't occurring, and B, if something is askew or something is wrong, then gives you the opportunity to address it. All right, so do we have any questions? Looks like we have a couple. First, do Massachusetts state mandates for harassment policy apply to local government as well? That's a good question. We'll follow up when we send out the slides. I don't know if there are any entities exempted from the requirements to have that written harassment policy and to distribute it once a year. To my knowledge, it's for any employer with 6 or more employees. I will check to see if municipalities or local government does have any sort of exception. And then next, have you looked at the training that California provides? What do you think about it? So I have not witnessed it. I'm assuming this means California has some complimentary training materials for the required sexual harassment training. So California is one of the states that does require sexual harassment training. I believe it's if you have 5 or more employees. They do also have time guidelines. So your general employee training in California has to be at least 1 hour. And for supervisory or higher level employees, it has to be at least 2 hours. So I guess I would say if it's a recording or like an LMS type, then I would imagine it meets those requirements. If it's written materials, I would just say make sure that whoever's going to be delivering the training knows how long it needs to be and make sure that they have enough content to fill that time. But to answer the question, I have not looked at what's provided by California. Here at MP, we do have a specific California harassment training, both for employees and for supervisors, and have it through an LMS so that we know it meets all the requirements for content as well as length. So it looks like that's it for our questions. Again, I thank you so much for your time and an important and a timely topic. Hopefully it's not something you have to deal with on a reactive basis, but if you do, hopefully you now feel a little bit better equipped to do so and also feel equipped with how to prep your managers and supervisors for those situations as they are quite scary. But otherwise, have a great day and I'll hand things back over to Katie.
Thanks, Paul. To learn more about MP's full service solutions for 2023 and more, I did just drop our website link into the chat, and that will connect you to our website so you can connect with an MP team member. You can visit our website at np-hr.com for even more information. And to be sure to join us next week for our upcoming webinar, Leave Laws, FMLA, PFMLA, and etc., when they intersect and how to navigate all of those. Visit our website to register and see the full calendar of upcoming events and available resources. We will be sending out the recording of today's webinar along with the presentation slides this afternoon. Thanks for joining us and have a terrific day.